Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, no matter where you are. My name is Yogesh Chavda. I'm the founder of Y2S Consulting. I'm also a faculty member at the University of South Carolina and the director for the Center for Marketing Solutions at the Business School at South Carolina. If people haven't been following the news from yesterday, US News and World Report announced their rankings for universities. South Carolina got ranked number one again for international business at the undergraduate and the graduate level. And they were also ranked for number one when it came to first year experience for students at the undergraduate level. So it was great kudos to the university for achieving those goals. I'm kind of proud to be part of that organization as well. So, but today we are going to be talking to Teresa Brazen. She is an executive coach. I'm going to have her introduce herself in a second, but I just want everyone to know that we kind of we crossed paths on LinkedIn a few months ago, and as when we had our first conversation, immediately I was enthralled with the knowledge and the insight that she had. So I was like, I need to have her in my podcast. That's it. So here we are. So Teresa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I've been anticipating it. So
Exactly, me too. I can't tell you how excited I've been for today. So let's start off first by having you introduce yourself a bit. Give us a little bit about your background and what do you do?
yeah, so I am the CEO and founder of Brazen Coaching and Consulting, and I'm a leadership and executive coach myself. And we focus on helping good people become really great leaders, which, in the context of the business world means leaders that are what I would call more human first in their orientation, that definitely are business-minded people, but are really focused on how to rally human beings toward a cause and a vision and a mission. So they do really great work, and they also create environments that are great for people to work in. And we do like one-on-one coaching, team coaching, workshops, offsites, all kinds of stuff like that.
I love people who do this kind of stuff because I know I've been fortunate enough to have coaches like you help me in my career, and it has made all the difference in the world. And I'm very grateful for the people who suggested that I do it. I'm glad I did it. I've actually had amazing experiences as part of that process. So you do an amazing job, just by being a coach already. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people that don't learn. A lot of people are learning about leadership on the ground, right? Just through trial and error by watching models around them who may or may not be great models. So it's really meaningful to work with people and help them just get better at that so they can have more impact.
Absolutely. So, when you and I spoke the last time, the thing that kind of caught my attention when we were speaking was about the fact that you're coaching leaders across the organizations, across multiple companies and so on and so forth. And with all the hype that's there right now with AI, I'm guessing you're hearing conversations about that, right? So let me kick it off by first asking you, as an executive coach, how are you guiding leaders to navigate all these AI-related demands, whether they're coming from the CEO or the CMO or any C-suite member that you may have been, interacting with?
Yeah, I love this question, and it's the timing of this conversation is really great because actually last week I was just in New York. I was invited by TDA, which is a global staffing agency for tech and design and product, data, cybersecurity folks, and they coordinated some roundtables with product and design leaders in New York, and we talked about all the stuff that I think we're going to be digging into today. How do we navigate all these demands around AI and cross-functional partnerships and all that good stuff? So I'll probably draw from a lot of that because my brain is really full. And I'm thinking about it because also one of the things that came up is, I think I like to call it the put an AI on it syndrome. I don't know if you've seen the show Portlandia.
Yes, I have.
Okay, for the people that haven't, just so you have some context, in this show, it's set in Portland, Oregon, and there's this kind of running joke that if you go into any shop in Portland, all the merchandise has a bird on it. And so there's this phrase like, put a bird on it. And anyways, I feel like there's a bit of that has been going on, is going to continue to go on. where people see everybody wants a piece of the AI pie. And, and this gets really tricky sometimes for leaders and organizations, because they may have a CEO or a CMO that's like, I want some of this AI, let's do something with this. But, and what they're often really seeing is an opportunity to make money, right? Or more visibility in the market, right? And they may or may not actually be, have a real understanding of, what they're really asking for. So one of the things that I coach leaders to do, and they came up in that conversation, is, first and foremost, leadership is about human beings, really, right? It's about leading groups of human beings toward a vision, a cause, a mission, and getting them to do really great work toward that goal. So, like, understanding the people that are making the requests, I think, is like the foundation first. The phrase that came up in that conversation was, know your CEO's love language. What is it that makes these folks tick, right? Like, what's the motivation behind the request? What are they motivated by? Mostly so that you can really tailor how you engage with them around that request. Because it could be a great idea, or it could be a terrible idea, or something in between. You got to suss it out. So the second thing I would say, is making sure that you understand the why behind the request, right? So don't take it at face value. What problem is that request actually trying to solve? And for customers specifically, right? What business goals is it supporting? What outcomes are they aiming to achieve? And sometimes they're not going to be able to answer that really well, and you have to work through that with them. And I think one example I heard in that conversation last week at the TDA roundtables was a one pager. There's one person brought up that they have a one pager that's called Start with Why. And any new request, no matter where it comes from, they have to fill this out so that they, maybe it's verbally, but they still have to be able to answer those questions so that everybody's starting from, clarity around the why behind the request.
I love that. Yeah, that's actually something I've not heard before. Just having that ability to write it down, I think is amazing.
Yeah. And it forces people to slow down, because one of the dangers with AI and kind of all new technologies is the impulse to, well, first of all, groupthink. Everybody thinks it's a good idea. So it's just sort of like racing toward the thing everybody else is racing toward, whether or not it's actually good for your company or good for customers. And it also slows you down so that you're not just chasing the shiny object. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're doing what's really right by your customers and what's right by the organization. I think another thing too is finding out what their mental model of AI or whatever the tech is.
Yeah.
Right? Because some people think of it as magic, and they have their perspective is that it can do now what it's actually not going to be able to do for another 10 years.
Correct.
Right. And they don't have a really deep understanding of like what in current reality of what it can actually do. So I think that's another thing to suss out.
But do you find that when these requests come from like senior leaders, in my experience, I found that the ask is usually it's quite vague, and there has to be some, to your point about asking the why questions, right? In a way, what you're really doing is you're putting some sort of guardrails around what it is and what it isn't, basically, right? So, did you hear that? Are you seeing that? I'm just curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think yes, multiple people in that conversation and even beyond that is a reality where there's a request and it's not actually very clear, and they're not actually very clear about it. They just know that they think their business should be doing something with that technology, right?
Yeah.
Some of the other things that I've heard leaders doing is making sure that they understand the trade-offs and the expense, right? So there's a whole new ecosystem of third-party tools. If you invest in them, the prices are likely going to go way up in the future as you become more dependent upon the tools. That may or may not even be something that's in the consciousness of the person who's asking about it. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but
Yeah, no, I think it does. I think there are two parts to this, right? One part um, are the leaders clear on the use cases,
yeah,
where and when to use AI?
yeah,
And the second part is implementation, in
right.
terms of what are the to your point, what are the trade-offs that are associated with the if you choose to go down that particular path or not, right? And I don't think right now, or let me say it a different way. I don't know what's actually happening in that space in terms of clarity on use cases and implementation plans. And I'm just curious as to whether you're seeing or hearing things in your conversations with leaders as to how are they thinking about those two scenarios.
Say that. Ask me that differently. I didn't
Okay,
totally follow the
so
question.
what I'm trying to poke out, to tease out basically is that, people say, "Oh, I want AI, I can slap it on everything," but that's like you said, it's not going
Yeah.
to be the case. Are they? How are they getting clear on what should be the actual use case they should be pursuing?
Okay. Okay. Well, one thing that I'm hearing is leaders talking about making sure that, well, there's multiple ways to think about this. So clarifying, are we boiling the ocean here? Is this a massive initiative?
Hmm.
Or is this someone else that, are you boiling the ocean or scooping out a cup? What's actually the right version of what we should be doing right now?
Right.
So, an example of that is I have been hearing examples of people steering toward and trying to steer their, let's say, CEOs or whoever it is that's making requests toward experimenting with more contained projects
Hmm. Hmm.
rather than just immediately integrating into something that's core to the product. So that's one way that I hear. Another thing that came up in the conversation for the roundtable last week is identifying where AI shines,
Hmm.
right? So it's worth integrating and using when it can, for example, amplify your service in some way or make workflow more efficient for the team. And actually, what I hear is that leaders are more comfortable with using AI internally for workflow and with their teams than customer facing. Not that they aren't playing there, but it's riskier there.
Right.
So yeah, that's what I'm hearing is like, we have to define whether this is a really big initiative or can we actually experiment first in something that's a more contained, or we can test and see before we're integrating into bigger initiatives.
So as they're thinking through that, that you could come up with very specific contained experiments to do. Um, what kind of questions do you get then in that context, in terms of how do I decide what should the criteria be? Like, are you
Mm.
those kinds of conversations with leaders as they're trying
Yeah,
to
that's great. That's a
Yep.
great question. That actually also came up last week. So I think people right now are trying to figure out the criteria. I mean, I don't
Okay.
know. Maybe some organizations have this really
Yeah.
nailed down, but I'm not. I haven't heard great examples of it yet. But one person brought up, you know, some of your criteria could be things like reliability and quality of the data. Um,
Mhm.
does it does it have potential to enhance the sort of human experience of our product or service, or is it
Mhm.
actually going to end up making the experience like devoid of the human touch?
Okay.
Will it be profitable? Like, is it likely to be profitable or not? We're talking about like third party and expenses, right, of
Yeah.
deploying it. And would it give us competitive edge? So those are like four, criteria that came up in the conversation last week. But I think what I like about what you're pointing at is it's better to get ahead of it, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's better to figure out, so what are our criteria? How do we make a decision about whether this is the right way to
Mhm.
go, so that you can bring that into the conversation when an executive is coming to you with a request, as, this is something we've already thought about. Like, this is how we assess whether or not we'll go this direction or not.
Of the four criteria you mentioned, the first one that you talked about, like, is it going to enhance or make your human experience less so? I've not
Mhm.
heard that as often. People all worry about that, but nobody's really put that down as a criteria, at least in my conversations.
Mhm.
And I'm just curious if you were hearing how do you even define that criteria in the first place? Because I think it's spot on. I just don't know how you would do it, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard anything, last week, or if you have any thoughts on that.
I'm not, I mean, I don't think I can speak that deeply to it other than that's like something that I think organizations have to figure out together or within their organizations. But
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do think
Yeah, no, I
the
get that.
concept is really smart.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think you're right. Because if you're clear about what is it that's going to help you enhance your human, your experience with the brand,
Mhm.
where you still have that personal touch or some sort of like emotional connection. I
Right.
think that's what's going to keep the brand authentic. Otherwise, if you start losing authenticity, then that becomes a problem.
Yeah, totally. And you're a marketing brand guy, so your perspective on that. Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, it's again, it's like don't chase it just because it's shiny. It needs to provide value, right? And
Yeah.
you really only should be using any kind of new technology if, I mean, yes, competitive edge. Is it going to improve the experience in some way for your customers, right? Because if they're
Yeah.
happy, your business is going to do well.
Exactly.
It's very easy to lose sight of that, though, in the excitement around new technologies.
So to that end, right? Because I agree with you. It's easy to lose sight. So you have to have that relentless, or almost maniacal, focus on your core product.
Mhm.
So, what are you advising leaders so that they don't lose sight of their core product and what they're really trying to accomplish? And then, how do you bring in AI in that context? I'm just curious to hear how you've been advising people on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of similar to one-on-one coaching. So a lot of times when I'm working with leaders, just on their own leadership skills,
Mhm.
we will work on figuring out some foundational things about themselves that they can then use as criteria for how they make decisions as leaders and how they present themselves as leaders and how they create team culture. So, in that case, it might be we're figuring out some of their personal values or purpose, like what kind of impact do they want to have as a leader.
Mhm.
And then we keep coming back to those tools and we use them, right? Because tools mean nothing if you don't use them. So similarly, in businesses, there are other tools that kind of provide the same service, right? So there's business goals, there's product vision, there's personas, like clarity about who we're serving and how they think. There's
Yeah.
clarity, like what's the problem to be solved. There's definition of success, definition of done, right? There are all these tools that we already have in our toolbox. And I think what this sort of hype era of AI brings up for me is discipline.
Mhm.
Discipline to come back to the tools, the agreements we made about who we're trying to be as a company and how we serve our customers, right? Actually pace, because speed for the sake of speed usually doesn't turn out well.
Yeah.
Right. Even though I know everyone feels that like we want to be the first to market. Well, I mean, you could argue being first to market isn't even necessarily the best, right? There are a lot of examples where being second to market was better, but
Exactly.
but it's like slow down, pace.
Mhm.
We have tools that we've invested in creating, and if we haven't, we need to,
Yeah.
right? And then let's use those to help us evaluate how we move forward.
Right.
So it's not like I have some new shiny thing to tell you. It's like I feel like all the tools are there. It's actually about discipline as leaders and
Mhm.
remembering to use those tools and still a culture where like we use those as guideposts. They're principles for how we make decisions.
Do you find that those leaders who are embracing these tools, like you're mentioning, tend to be a lot more, how do I say this? They tend to be more curious and they tend to be more open-minded to experimentation versus those leaders who are less inclined to use those kinds of tools, even though they're exposed to them. I'm just curious to hear if you're seeing a difference in that context at all or not.
I can't say I see that. I think it's more of what I see is whether they've been exposed to good examples of those tools and
Okay.
those tools used well. So, for
Yeah.
example, I used to work for Cooper, which is a user-centered design agency,
Yeah.
and they invented the concept of personas that are used in design.
Mhm.
And so I've taught tons of classes on how to create them, right?
Mhm.
And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people or seen terrible examples. So they're not credible, right? Like people are like, where did you get this from? Like,
Yeah.
what's the rigor behind this tool? And sometimes that's a symptom of there not being transparency about how they were created.
Yeah.
Or the other thing, so then they're just kind of like not actually bought into them, right? They were like, oh, that's just like something you do for the sake of doing, but we don't actually use them. Or maybe they have good examples, but there's no culture of actually the discipline of using them.
Right.
So they make personas, or even they have business goals, but they're not regularly coming back to them as a practice, as a yeah.
Because
does that make sense to you? Do you
yes,
see
completely
that?
does. Yeah, because I think it leads to my follow-up question, which is that, that context that you just gave, those two scenarios that you just gave, to me also kind of like an indicator or an early signal for when it comes to adoption of AI tools or the overusage or underusage of AI tools. They're all kind of connected in that sense as well, because if they're not, if they don't have the discipline, they're not kind of like, doing it from a cultural perspective, what's the odds of them then really embracing AI tools in the first place, right?
Yeah, which goes back to something I mentioned earlier, which is I actually think it's not important that you just know, how does let's say the CEO or CMO is making a request associated with AI and understanding like what's their mental model of AI. When we're saying AI, what do they think that is? I actually think that would be valuable to have as a team or as a company to have a conversation about that. Because one thing I've learned from just being an educator, I've taught a lot of classes over the years, is that people use very basic terms in very different ways. And you can have an entire class or conversation, but you could teach an entire class and realize at the end, the entire time, you and a student were thinking about things in a very different way.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same in organizations. So clarity of terms, I think can be helpful too.
And I think that's the role of the leader in this case, to really like lead that process, right? They may not be the ones actually writing and articulating the terminology, but just making sure that that becomes part of their ask to their organization is really critical, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally agree.
So as you've been coaching people through this, are you finding there are specific strategies that are really good when it comes to making sure that when AI tools, as you're talking to leaders about AI tools, they fit into the product's vision that they have? Or how do you approach that conversation? If I'm not sure about how that happens. So
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, because there must be ways to kind of like make sure that the leader is kind of like articulating what the strategy needs to be for AI as they're trying to think about the adoption of AI. But it has to fit into the context of their core proposition or their product's vision at the end of the day, right? So are you seeing any examples of effective strategies for that at all, or no?
For how to talk about the way AI is fitting into the existing strategy?
Yeah.
I mean, I can't say I'm not in those conversations right now. I'm working with leaders on their leadership skills or teams on their team dynamics. I'm trying to think of what I could offer for that.
Or are you seeing from even a leadership style that do they have to flex their style as they're working through this particular issue? I'm guessing is the question.
Oh, well, yeah, I don't tell me if I'm answering your question right, but I mean, certainly one thing with in leadership is knowing how to talk to different audiences.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I think what you're getting at is like leadership range and your ability to sort of tell a story differently to different audiences. I mean, there's a lot there. Like, oh gosh, I'm like, where do I dive into this one? I think it's really important to understand the communication style of different key stakeholders, for example. There's Kevin Cruz has these, I can't remember what it's called, but I think it's called Leadership IQ or something like that. He has these, it's like a framework for 4 different kinds of communication styles. And like, I need to go look it up. I don't have it like right offhand, but I know it's like analytic. I feel like it's basically like people that are more like detail and process oriented, people that are more people oriented, and people that are more oriented toward like big picture thinking and ideas, and then more analytical. Right? And depending on which of those types you are interacting with, you should be speaking in very different ways, right? Sure. So if you go in with the person with the big picture thinking, like they're going to be excited about hearing ideas, they're not going to want to get deep into the details, right? Whereas someone who's more, detail and process oriented, if you aren't explaining sort of the steps to get to that vision, you're going to lose them, right? So I don't know if this is getting at what you're talking about at all, but
no, I think you are, because at the end of the day, what I think, what I'm trying to get to basically is that if a leader like a CEO or a CMO is saying we want to do AI, right? Organization is not sure about what to do or how to go about doing it. There is this tension that's there, where to drive adoption and to drive implement it, and to make sure it actually gets implemented, the leader has to flex their leadership style to be able to convince their organization, or at least rally the organization to say, okay, we're going to follow you because we agree that this is the right thing to do, right? So I was just curious from your experiences as to what are leaders doing in that context, because I'm guessing that that they're having to lead in this case towards a vision where no one's sure how to do it. That's scenario one. Or it could be or it could be a different scenario where the organization's already bought into it. They're like, we got to do this, and the leader's the one who's actually acting as the resistor, saying, let's slow things down because I don't know what's the right thing to do. So I'm just curious to see if you're seeing those kinds of scenarios, and how do you advise leaders in either of those 2 scenarios, basically?
Yeah. So, okay. So to go back to where we were a second ago, I mean, I think one is know your audience, right? And know especially in one-on-one conversations with executives, like you need to, you do need to flex your leadership range and speak to them in a way that is going to signal to them that they can trust you and that you understand what matters to them. First and foremost, that's what I was saying in the beginning. Like I guess that one of the first things I would say is start with asking a lot of questions. Right. And, and we talked about, what basically like, what's the motivation behind this and what problem does this solve? What business goals do you think this is connected to that that we're already committed to? Or do you think this is like points towards something totally new that we need to do? And, and reflecting back also, just as a side note, is, here's what I'm hear you saying, right? That builds more trust. Then they feel like, okay, you're digesting, you're not judging, you are hearing what I'm saying. You can, in the case of, if you're already skeptical that this is a good direction to go for the company, say something like, I think there are some other ways that we could get after what you're after. With less risk and expense. Would you be open to exploring that? Would you be open to my team and I coming back to you with some ideas? So, and then the other thing I would say is be willing to push back, and call a spade that this sounds really exciting. This is going to divert tons of resources from things that we have prioritized. And if we're going to do this, we need to be really clear about the impact, right? And my professional opinion is this is not a good direction to go, because here's the cost to our organization if we don't do what we already committed to doing. Those kind of truth to power conversations. I mean, everyone's different, but I would say in general, what I see is that the higher up people are, the more they really want people to tell them the truth. And the less people tell them the truth, the less people are direct with them. So you can, in some cases, again, I'll CEOs and executives are different, so I don't want to like make a total blanket statement, but sometimes I can actually win you points. And I think the other thing you were talking about is like, okay, so that's a little bit around like pushback if it seems like a request that doesn't have a lot of weight to it and probably isn't a good direction for the company. But in the case where it's worth exploring, then you have to figure out, and you're not figuring this out by yourself. You shouldn't be figuring this out by yourself. Like, actually, that's like a whole other piece of the conversation. Is like, no one's figuring this out by themselves. You have to do this cross-functionally with a whole bunch of other people, right? So you need to get the perspective of other experts across, the organization. But if collectively you agree with the the person who made the request that this is a good idea, or some version, something like that is a good idea, then I think one of the interesting things is to think about what kind of culture and environment do you want to create around this initiative? Like what kind of tone and mood do we want everyone who's working on this to feel when they're working on this together? And you can be intentional, is it like we want it to be, this is going to be fast, experimental, fun, light, risks are okay, or is it of some other flavor? And if it's the version I just talked about, I think it's really important as a leader, well, actually in any scenario, whatever kind of culture you want to create around an initiative, because I think of cultures like team culture, or initiative culture, like what's the dynamic? What does it feel like to be involved? I think it's really important that you both, it's important what you model and what you say. So if it is, this is going to be a contained project over here, it's going to be, like I just described, fun, energizing, experimental. You need to approach it that way yourself as a leader, because there's this thing called emotional contagion, and people pick up on your emotions and your signals, and they integrate them in themselves. Like you have a lot of impact as a leader. So, that might be doing things like modeling. It would be, okay, they try something, it fails. And then you divert them away from being disappointed in the failure, and you focus them on, okay, what are we learning here? This is all about learning. What's the important thing that we take away from this that we can integrate into our next iteration? Or if we're going to, call it on this and try something totally different, what have we learned that's important for that? And keep helping the team come back to that experimental mindset. And I think the other thing you can do as a leader is just tell them very directly, this is the kind of environment I want us to create together. And we're all a part of that. We're going to co-create that environment. And one of the promises I can make to you is that, we're going to take risks. We're going to take calculated risks. If they don't work, I don't want you to stress. I will take the bullet for you. That's my job as a leader. And if you're modeling it, and really the modeling is more important than what you say, but both, and you can create a certain kind of environment for that. I don't know if I think I went on a tangent. I don't know if that's where you wanted to go at all.
No, you're touching on things that are actually really important, right? Because I think part of the challenge that I'm seeing right now across the industry right now is that there's a lot of hype about AI, right? We agree on that. Adoption is there, but it's uneven, depending on the company you're talking about. And part of the adoption challenges that are there, in my opinion, part of it's because of just perception issues of around security, privacy, risk, etc. Of cost being another one. Those things are there; they're very real issues, and that have to be addressed. So, but there's also a leadership challenge here also, in terms of which companies and which leaders are going to step up, and how are they going to role model the adoption of these kinds of tools, because there is that real fear that employees have that, will AI replace my job?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think there's an underlying current that's there where leaders have to address that somehow. And that's why when you're talking about the modeling piece and the role of experimentation, that's giving employees license to say, okay, I'm trying the tool out. It may or may not work, but I'm okay because my boss has my back for me,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So that's why I'm really happy you're bringing these points out, because I think that's part of the messaging that needs to be happening across the industry as well. That this is not something that's like, you buy off the shelf and you just plug it in and it's going to work for you. You have to experiment and you have to
Yeah.
learn and go through a learning curve of your own.
Yep.
The leader has to go through it and the organization has to go through it too, basically, right?
Yeah. Well, and one thing that I think helps I think that's all very astute. Yes. And one thing that can help too in that context of like, we're all figuring this out. Nobody's got this figured out. Everybody.
Exactly.
So the wise thing is to treat it like an experiment, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought. I was going to say, is to be, I mean, I think in general, this is really smart from a leadership perspective, but in particular in this context, is to be as transparent as you can be.
Yeah.
And be as authentic as you can be.
Yeah.
Because you're in it's a space that could very easily feel very unsafe for people. And when people feel unsafe, they are not very creative.
Yes, exactly.
Right? And they don't really experiment. They do little baby experiments, And this is a territory where you need people to get uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And part of what helps people get uncomfortable is if they have a leader or a team culture that is authentic and transparent. And I say, like, make it fun.
Yeah.
This stuff can feel very heavy and serious, and like everyone's going to lose their jobs, or we're going to be the last market and everyone's going to, but all of that it affects the way our brains work, and it affects the way that we work together, not for the better.
Yeah. So to that end, with your vast experience of coaching, leaders across organizations, how do you create that kind of, safe space for people? What should leaders say or do to create that fun aspect, the creative aspect, and so on and so forth? What would you advise people on that front?
So, I mean, some of it I said, which is like, as a leader, I think, okay. One is you have to lead yourself before you can lead others. So clarity as a leader around what really matters to you, what kind of impact you want to have, what your values are, and using those and leading from that place really changes the way people experience you as a leader. Mm-hmm. And then therefore changes the culture of the team. So that's one thing, is just like do the work on your own leadership. Leadership is a practice. You're never done with it. And really knowing yourself. And then the second thing would be, I believe that leadership is actually a team sport. I don't think of leadership as like, I have kind of talked about it, I think, in a way that sounds like it's like one person making a decision, but in reality, what we're talking about is you're coordinating, engaging, enrolling a whole bunch of people towards something. Mm-hmm. And so you should be co-creating a lot. So having very explicit conversations about team culture, mm-hmm. right? Or the culture of an initiative, where this is this pet AI project over here, and it's going to be like risky and fast, and everybody makes culture. So bringing everybody into the conversation mm-hmm. about how to do that, you'd be amazed by what your team can come up with as ways of creating that kind of culture, instead of thinking that you have to create it and generate it yourself.
Right. That's an important point in terms of how you bring people in to have the kind of, and invite them into that conversation where they feel safe enough to be able to say, hey, this is working, this is not working.
Yeah.
And this is what we do differently, right?
Even in a like really explicit way at the beginning of a project kickoff, you should talk about this stuff. What do we want it to feel like to work together?
Right.
What would make us feel like this was a good human experience for us as a team? Right?
Yeah.
And then come back to that. So, we talk about discipline and tools, right? So you make some agreements about, here's what we want. Here's some like rituals we're going to have as a team, or ways that we're going to communicate and collaborate. Yeah. But then you can't just like have that conversation and not do it. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And once you get into an initiative, it's all hands on deck, everyone's racing. So actually planning from the beginning to have at least a midpoint check-in that's a zoom out about how are we doing as a team? How is our culture as a team? How are our dynamics? Not all the like deadlines and deliverables and whatever, but like health check.
Yeah.
And then doing that at the end, we talk about retrospectives. I think a lot of time when people think about retrospectives, they're thinking about sort of the mechanics of a project, but not like, and how is the team culture and what can we learn from that? Was it really amazing? And then what should we do again in our next project? Or was it really toxic? And let's not do that again. And here are some changes we're going to make. But being disciplined about those touch points.
I love that. Because I see this also at, I teach classes, right? So I have, my, within a class, I have 3 or 4 student teams that form. Sometimes the student team works very effectively. Sometimes they don't, right?
Yeah.
And, it shows up in its own unique ways, whether they are, communicating outside of class, are they meeting together? Are they focused on the same end goal? Do they all believe that it's the right end goal? I see that even at the student level as well, which then obviously translates into the workplace when they transition eventually. And this literally happened to me this week, in fact, where there was a student group team that did not meet, and it was clear when they were talking to me, that they had not met. So I called them out on it, and they were like, you know, they 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 came around and they finally admitted to me that we had not met. And I was like, okay, fine. So I said, and that shows in the quality of your work. So how are you going to do this differently now moving forward? And that just asking that question and making them kind of like own their accountability for not having done that was like the inflection point in my mind where they changed their behavior. And now I'm getting emails from them. I'm seeing, the quality of their work coming through, which is very different than what had happened the week before, basically.
Yeah. There's a question that's coming up in my mind. And when I work with people, well, either teams or individuals, a lot of times we co-create some field work for them. That's what I call it. So like things for them to go practice or do, or challenges to take on between now and the next time I'll see them. And sometimes they don't stick to those commitments. And the next time I see them, it's the first thing I ask about. So how did that go? And, and then, sometimes they're a little sheepish or this came up or that came up. And I love to ask, well, what's important about that? It's a real thing. You didn't do it. What's important about it? And it might be what's important is I or we are way overtaxed and oversubscribed, and I signed up for too much, and I need to reevaluate, right? Like my commitments. Or it might be I'm avoiding something, or it might be I actually don't like those people and I don't want to spend time with them. I don't know. I mean, especially when you get thrown into groups that you have no control over, which is like, that's the business world, right?
Exactly. And I would say, to add to it, if you're being asked to do something that's really, really hard that you've never done before, right? To your point about getting out of your comfort zone, it's just like everything that could go wrong can go wrong in that scenario, basically. Right. So I think that's where the leader has to kind of like really help, level set, give people the self-confidence and the reassurance to say, hey, we'll get through this. We're hitting some roadblocks right now. It's hard to do, but we'll figure it out together, basically. So this is fascinating because it's getting me to think about even from a classroom environment perspective, I'm seeing those micro behaviors inside the class.
Oh yeah, totally. We're the same from like when we're kids. We just, have bigger bodies and more baggage. I don't know.
Wasn't there a little book? I remember seeing this maybe like 10, 15 years ago. Everything I learned in kindergarten or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I believe it.
So I'm a firm believer in that too, because a lot of the behaviors you pick up happen at a very early age. So So
well, go ahead. You go ahead.
No, please, no, go ahead.
No, I think maybe you were going to go where I wanted to go. We'll see. Go ahead.
If I'm not, then you can stop me and you can do what you want to do. So I wanted to ask you, around experimentation. Like we talked about it already a little bit, but as a coach, what would be your advice to people, to get into that experimentation mindset in the first place, especially when you're hesitant and you're let's say, risk averse, how would you coach them through the
Oh,
process?
I got a great answer to this. So I think one of the, well, I have like multiple ways of thinking how to answer this. So when we are overwhelmed or intimidated by something, a big goal,
Yeah.
And in fact, if we are sort of not looking forward to the process of getting to that goal,
Mm.
a lot of times people will be like, visualize the end goal. It's actually a terrible thing to do in that case because it actually just overwhelms you more. And this applies for teams too. I think one thing you can do is just ask yourself, what happens if we don't do anything?
Mm-hmm.
And usually, okay, well, in the case of a team okay, it could be, well, if we don't do anything, then we aren't taking advantage of a competitive edge that we see is a possibility for us.
Mm-hmm.
We don't get to market
Mm-hmm.
in time. We don't do well as a company, but also just as a team, we don't feel particularly great about our work. We don't have anything to talk about in terms of like our portfolios and case studies of interesting projects that we've done. And we know that we let fear slow us down. And if you really like sit with what does it mean to do nothing?
Yeah.
You start to realize how big the stakes are of doing nothing. Like it's easy to just sort of avoid something until you actually see what the real longer term implications are of avoiding it or not doing it.
Mm-hmm. I love
And
that.
usually that can give you enough motivation to do the things you don't want to do, or to start or to deal with, like address the toxic relationship dynamic in a cross-functional team or, whatever, because the trade-off is worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're basically forcing people to think through that, okay, if we do something, yeah, it's hard, difficult, challenging, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. That's one path. Or you can say, if you don't do anything, this is the consequences of doing
Play
nothing.
it out,
Lay it out for
like
people.
really in detail. And then what else? And then what else? And then what else?
Yeah.
Because then you start to actually see it. And it's
Right.
not sort of abstract. It's like, oh shit. Like
I
that
love
actually is not a future I want. And that is motivating enough for me to do something now that is scary. But also, I want to go back to the thing I was saying before about, expecting people to be experimental and risk taking in a culture and an environment that
Mm-hmm.
actually like reprimands people for taking risks is unrealistic, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to, you need to work, if you're a leader, with other people and with your team to create an environment where people are going to be able to lean into that.
Right. Right. So there are a couple of things here, right? The culture of the company, whether it's risk averse
Yeah.
or not,
Yeah.
right? That's driven by, when we say culture, we're talking about a group of people inside who are really being risk averse and
Yeah.
they don't want to take any action. So as a leader coming in, let's say, who's more experimental, he or she has to really help everybody see the consequences of an action, basically,
Mhm.
and staying where you are, right? In a way.
Mhm.
And that's not easy to do at all,
Mhm.
in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think if you ask enough questions and get people to think about it, it sort of presents itself. Another thing it's bringing up for me is I remember, I think Steve Jobs, when he came, it was like there was an Apple museum, and
Mhm.
he like on the first floor of the building, and he like got rid of it because for him it symbolized, and I think he like communicated this, that it was really focused on the past. And he didn't want to focus on the past. He wanted everybody to be focused on the future. So there are also like other things you can do to sort of signal to people that we're going to do things differently,
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. And anchoring it towards the future, that is uncertain, it's volatile, right? It's ambiguous, right? All these words,
Yeah.
come to mind, right? It's hard for people to anchor themselves, and it's easy for them just to stick to what they know,
Yeah.
because That's what
Yeah.
got them to where they are in the first place,
Yeah.
right? But now
Yeah.
we're saying, no, that's not the case anymore,
Yeah.
right? So,
Another thing that comes up for me too with this is, we're talking about the way I think about it is AI is, it's not so, yes, it's a technical challenge or just new technologies. There's like the technical challenge of it, which I think is what most people end up focusing on. But
yeah.
I think of it as a human challenge because human beings have to work together to figure out how to use it for
Yes.
better or worse, right? That's the crux of what's actually, I think, hardest. And so, I do work with cross-functional teams to help them with their dynamics as they work on things like this, right? Like,
Yeah.
because everybody's got to, engineering, data, design, product, they've got to work together. And one of the things that I see is that in a lot of cases, people are thrown together in a group, like in your class, right? And they're given, here's the initiative, here's what we're going to do. And maybe they are clear about, here are the goals and the problems we're solving and the customers we're doing it for. And they come up with a plan for how they're going to engage and they get started and they're off to the races and they don't know anything about each other.
Yes.
And expecting a bunch of people who have invested zero time in understanding each other as human beings to figure out complex problems together they're not going to do a good job. They're not going to do a good job because they have to work together. So like one of the things I do is I'll have people spend some time, a cross-functional group, for example, learning about each other and interviewing each other and just understanding like what are their top 3 goals? How do they want to grow? How would they be excited to grow through this initiative? What's keeping them up at night? What drives them crazy about my team?
Yeah.
What do they do outside of work? Like what do they love doing? Like who are they as a person outside of just their function, right?
Yeah.
And it can, I think in a lot of cases, businesses is just like, oh, we're really going to spend a day like working on that? Yes, because you're going to save so much money because they're going to be so much more efficient and they are going to work through challenges so much better because they have human connection, but they also understand each other better as humans.
I'm so glad you brought that up because, in my 30 years of working in the corporate world, I can count on one hand the number of times we had exactly what you're describing, where everyone knew each other and they trusted each other, and we had so much fun working. Like work. It didn't
It's a
matter.
whole different thing.
Exactly, right? Compared to those other situations where it was exactly what you're describing, where I didn't know the people, they didn't know me, and it was like pulling teeth in a way, right?
Right.
Kind of
And there's a lot of friction. There's a lot of misunderstanding. You're not efficient or effective because there's a lot of spin that happens.
Exactly.
As opposed to like co-solving a problem, and I think there's other things that can support creating that kind of environment. Like, one is working as a team on letting go of, the idea that your team is your design team or your product team, but your team is, that the team of that particular initiative or function in the organization, which is hard to overcome. It's hard to overcome because, one of the big things is a lot of organizations are actually incentivizing a siloed approach to work. Like the incentives can be in conflict between different groups.
Yes. And therein lies the rub, right? Because it's in conflict, it's hard to get people to work towards a common objective, even if it's on a particular work stream. I can't tell you how many times I've experienced that, and it's been so hard to get things to happen as a consequence.
Yeah.
But no, this is great. I have a question for you. If people wanted to reach out to you and they say, "Hey, Teresa, we need help. Do you have any models or resources?" What would you say to them?
Yes. So, well, first of all, on my website, there are like 4 free resources. One of which I think is relevant to what we were just talking about. It's called a user manual. It's basically a set of a whole bunch of questions that you could ask your partners, your direct reports, your boss, to understand them in a much deeper way. And that's a tool I actually use in some of my work. Also, I do a workshop called Optimize Cross-Functional Outcomes, where I can come in and work with a cross-functional team, either in the beginning of a new initiative, or if they're having trouble with the dynamics, across function or across the teams, to help them work on getting to know each other, how they communicate, how they collaborate, so that they are able to work together better. So I could be brought in for that if anybody's interested in that. And then also, I would just say, every week I share leadership tips, team tips, like all kinds of things related to stuff that we've been talking about. So if people are interested in that, they can join my mail list, which is on my website, which is teresabrazen.com. So
perfect.
Our
And if people want to connect with you on LinkedIn, is that okay?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Teresa, I learned a lot today. There were like 3 or 4 nuggets in here in this conversation that I'm going to take back into conversations with people as well. So just to kind of give you a sense of what really stood out to me. I love the point that you made around that, anything you do with technology has to be enhancing the human experience in terms of how your product or service is being offered. I think that's a brilliant piece of, context that you gave from a decision criteria perspective. I love that point. From a leadership perspective, I love the point that you have to be clear yourself about what is it that's really driving and motivating you, and your values that you have, and how does that come across? Because if you're not creating that kind of contagion, the team won't have it, and if the team doesn't have it, it will show up externally with the kind of solution that you're offering to your customers. So that
domino effect, or Russian dolls, nesting dolls. Yeah.
Exactly right. So that's a big thing in my mind about that. I love the point you made around people who are risk averse or who are unwilling to get on board, how to break that logjam by asking them what happens if you don't do anything, and thinking that through. I think that's a brilliant way of doing it. I wish I knew that before when I was working in the corporate world. Too late, but better late than never, right? And the last thing I would say is that there are all these mental models that that you're offering through your through your user manual and everything else like that, where I think people can really think through, no matter what the problem is, you can think through exactly what's going on. So I'm so grateful that you came on today and you helped us think about these kinds of questions along the way, basically. So really appreciate that.
I loved this conversation. I'm so pleased that you invited me. So thank you.
You're very welcome. So we're coming up to the hour. So thank you so much for Teresa. The next show is going to be on October 17th. So it's 3 weeks from now. We're going to have David Bernardino, who's just kind of started his own little venture in the last couple of weeks. He's worked at a bunch of companies over the years. I met him when I was at Procter & Gamble, and he and I have stayed in touch. He's also a board member at my center. But October 17th, 11 a.m. Central Time, you'll get to hear him talk about agency client models and what's broken and how to solve for it. So that's going to be an interesting conversation as well. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Teresa, one more time for being here, and we'll see everybody soon.